What up, y'all? It's Mr. Worldwide from Mtg. We like it in Magic, and today on this beautiful summer evening, we have about 35 more cards from Dominaria United to look at. They just kept coming today, and they all look pretty decent, save for a few drafty things. But we did get a bunch of rares and mythics that look good, and even the uncommons, especially the uncommons, are popping off today. So there's a lot to talk about. Let's go ahead and jump in. But don't get too excited. We got to start things off with a couple of normie cards, because not everything can be special, and that's okay. We still get cool stuff like Coalition Sky Knight, Argivian Cavalier, Citizen's Arrest, which is the O-ring of this set. You've read this box so many times with minor tweaks at this point. You could probably read it with a blindfold on. This is just 1 and 2 white for an enchantment. When an ETBs, exile target creature or planeswalker until what happens? Can you guess? Until Citizen's Arrest leaves the battlefield. Yeah, tried and true. Solid piece for removal, but nothing too exciting about it. Coalition Sky Knight, on the other hand, is also not super exciting. This is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 2/2 human knight with flying and enlist. So they have to fill the set out, especially for draft purposes, and this card kind of has to exist. It's like, what if we made a Windrake with enlist? Well, it would cost an extra mana. All right, slap it on a card, let's print it. Can't be too good. We'll move on to Argivian Cavalier, which is actually not bad, in the limited environment at least. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/2 Orc Knight, cool, with Enlist, and when it ETBs, you get a 1/1 soldier creature token that's white. This is kind of okay, right? It's 3 mana for 3 power and 3 toughness and stats. And when this guy attacks, he might as well have been a 3 mana 3/3, right? Because you're going to enlist with the token, and you might enlist with something even bigger than that and then leave the token to block or something. So, like, again, bread and butter little 3-drop for aggressive or mid-rangey, sealed and draft decks. So, not a bad thing. You'll play this some of the time. There was also the inevitable Thrill of Possibility reprint, so there you go. And Balduvian Berserker. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 1/3 core Berserker with Enlist, and when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. It's sort of super fanatical Firebrand. But they forgot that when you make a super version of a card that costs more mana than the original card, you should probably give it more power. They didn't do that for this. And yeah, it enlists. There's all kind of ways that you can make this thing much bigger. But counterpoint, so we also got even more potentially very sweet kicker stuff at Uncommon today, ranging from stuff like Warhost's Frenzy and Colossal Growth, which are just decent, to some other cards that look just fantastic to me. But Frenzy we'll start with. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for an instant with kicker, black. Creatures you control get +2/+0 till end of turn. If the spell is kicked, whenever a creature you control dies this turn, draw a card. That's actually kind of sick. And hey, yeah, Twitch chat. We're going to play with this. This is just like one of the better Burn Bright variants that's ever been printed. And I will say this, in like an Aristocrats build of some kind where you're going to sacrifice dudes anyway, you can kind of go off with this for 4 mana. Like if you know that like 5 of your guys are going to die that turn to sacrifice triggers anyway, yeah, go haul off and draw you some cards. This actually could potentially be sneakily really sweet. And I like the Aristocrats decks that like to get aggressive, and this really prioritizes that. So I think this is a cool card, but it's probably not good. There are differences in those two things. Colossal Growth, on the other hand, is 2 mana, 1 and a green for an instant, has kicker red. Target creature gets +3/+3 till end of turn. If the spell was kicked, instead that creature gets +4/+4 and gains trample until end of turn. So that's actually kind of tempting. That doesn't seem too bad. I mean, in your Gruul aggro deck, you might play a copy or 2 of this, and then when your opponent lets something through, well, it's 2 mana for +3/+3. That's extra combat damage. Maybe saves a dude from a bolt spell. Maybe saves a dude from a bad block or something like that. Or conversely, if your opponent tries to just chump block a big dude or whatever, well, suddenly he gets huge and has trample. I guess I win the game. How did that happen? So, like, this is actually really, really interesting, but I'm not sure that it's worth the slots in aggro decks for what is effectively a 3 mana pump spell that the moment you pull the trigger on it, you're probably going to get blown out by an instant speed removal spell or something. So that's not guaranteed to happen every time, but I'm still not sure that it's going to be worth the slot when you could just be playing better cards. But again, it's tempting to try to blow people out and just trample through them with your thing that started as a 2/2, but like now it's a 6/6 and it just blows through the 2/2 that blocked it. And again, could be decent, but it really needs to be worth the slots, and there's some really powerful cards in Gruul aggro already. We got Timely Interference and Choking Miasma today. Interference is not too impressive looking, but, could be surprised by this one. This is just a blue mana for an instant with kicker, 1 and a red. Target creature gets -1, -0 till end of turn. If the spell was kicked, that creature blocks this turn if able, and then you draw a card. So what I really just want you to see here is that this is a 1-mana cantrip, so we can't trip. At the end of the day, the core of this is 1 mana to draw a card, so it can't be horrible, but I don't think it's going to see any play. Choking Miasma, on the other hand, this card has a chance. This is 1 and 2 black for a sorcery with kicker green. If this spell was kicked, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. All creatures get -2/-2 till end of turn, so it's a variant of this card. Being able to save one of your X2s, and it's bigger for the rest of the game too, is actually kind of slick. So I think this card is sweet. I think this card is actually really sweet. I'm not sure that it's destined to see too much main board play or anything, but in the Golgari decks that do play creatures, which is most of them, you know, this saves X2s while killing all the aggro dudes. So that could actually be a blowout play on like multiple possible, realistic, very likely board states in Standard right now. But I definitely saved these two uncommon kicker cards for last. This is Joint Exploration and Fires of Victory. Exploration is 1 and a blue for an instant with kicker green. You scry 2, then you draw a card. If the spell was kicked, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If the spell was kicked, you may Growth Spiral, just for an extra mana, right? Which still makes it a solid card, because Growth Spiral was, if you recall, extremely good. Just a filthy magic card. This is like a mana less than Eureka Moment. If you want another comparison, it doesn't generate card advantage like Moment can, right? But I always felt like Eureka Moment costs an extra mana. Because of that, you may put a land onto the battlefield. This is an interesting way of solving that, right? This, you can tack an extra mana onto if you can ramp with it. But it doesn't just assume you can ramp. It's not presumptuous. It can also be cast for 2 mana, at which point you just like preordain, right? Just scry 2, draw a card. At instant speed, which is really not bad. Like, this is going to be a card that's going to see play if there's a Simic, Sultai, Bant, whatever, ramp deck in the environment. I think this sees a good 3 or 4 of play. And Fires of Victory is pretty impressive too. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant with kicker, 2 and a blue. If this spell was kicked, draw a card. Fires of Victory deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the number of cards in your hand. There's a lot of cool things about this and a lot of kind of weird edge things to bring up with it, but just first of all, in the early game, in your Is It Control deck, this is probably going to hit something for like 5, you know, that's really very good, I would assume, so I think this is probably going to see a fair amount of play, even if you just need a spell that hits a creature for 4 damage in the early game, I think this does so reliably, so it's pretty good. It wouldn't cast on turn 2 or 3. Against your aggro opponent, but there's an interesting tension with not only this card, but obviously all of the kicker cards in this set. In the Is It decks, this might actually signal this huge sea change. Allow me to go off nerdily on this for a second. Right now, the Is It decks play things like Fading Hope, which doesn't really generate card advantage. It plays things like Big Score, which doesn't really generate card advantage, right? Bounce spells and, you know, card draw spells that are effectively parity and not card advantage usually make it to where that Is It deck doesn't actually have that many cards in its hand in the late game, so this card is just kind of bad. So if Is It wants access to a card like this, it might have to drop the Fading Hopes, it might have to play like Memory Deluge or something that actually generates real card advantage in order to keep its hand count up, so it can actually utilize this spell. But even in the decks that play the Fading Hopes, the bounce spells, and the, you know, discard a card draw spells and stuff like that aren't real card advantage, this card might still be playable, because on turn 2, turn 3, it's probably going to kill something, you know, and later on in the game when you draw it, at the very least, it draws a card. You can effectively cycle this for 5 mana, so at least I guess it's got that going for it too. So a lot of cool things about all of these cards, a lot of tension, a lot of decision points, and that makes for good Magic. But we're not quite out of the uncommon woods yet. We got stuff like Hurler Cyclops, Slimefoot Survey, and I think notably Pilfer. This is just 2 mana, 1 and a black for a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. Player discards that card. Kingdom Hearts. Simple and clean. Good old discard spell. What could go wrong? Just take a card. Just take any old card. Just take any card from them. That's actually pretty strong. That's all there is to it. Just a strong card that could probably see some play. Up next, though, is Slimefoot Survey. 5 mana, 4 and a green for a sorcery with Domain. Search your library for up to 2 land cards that each have a basic land type. Put them on the battlefield tapped and then shuffle. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put one of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom in a random order. So this wants to go hard, but then it chickens out and puts the card on top of your library, which is silly. I don't like that it puts the card on top of your library. Why can't it just put the card in your hand? Was that too good? I will say, though, in those domain decks, it takes you from 5 to 7. And that'll help you play your Titan of Industry without even dropping a land on the next turn, so that could potentially be important. You know, it puts you on your Kami War or whatever that you needed the mana for, you needed the lands for. So, this ramps you into pretty much every important thing while also virtually guaranteeing that you have a 5 domains. So this could be even better than I think it looks, and I think it looks slightly better than most people think it looks. Meanwhile, Hurler Cyclops is the kind of card I really want to be excited about, but it's like 3 mana too expensive. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 5/4 Cyclops. And you pay a mana, you pay a mana and sack another creature. Hurler Cyclops deals a damage to any target. I guess what I'm saying is I just want Goblin Bombardment in Standard. I don't think we're going to get that. But at 5 mana, this is a pretty solid little dude for draft and stuff, He's got okay stats for his mana cost. And even though he cost mana to use, it doesn't cost that much mana. You untap with this guy in play, and suddenly you swing in, and then, any creatures that don't get through for combat damage, they get blocked. You just throw them at your opponent. Or maybe you throw them at other creatures that are blocking other things. A lot of math involved with Hurler Cyclops. It doesn't look like there would be math with this guy, but turns out actually, yes. We'll be using algebra like mad today. Just actually pretty solid again. I keep using that word, but just a good little dude in limited, kind of at the top of your curve in the aggressive decks as a form of reach to make sure that you can deal that last few points of damage to your opponent. And I wish it was as good as that in Standard, but 5 mana, cost mana to use, can't use it the turn it comes into play. If you play it on curve, just no. Probably not, and I'm sad to report. We saw Founding the Third Path today. I feel like this card started life as a rare, but now it's an uncommon. So we're covering it in this section. This is just 1 and a blue for an enchantment. It's a saga. And it's got read ahead. On first chapter, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. On Chapter 2, target player mills 4 cards. And on Chapter 3, exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. Copy it, you may cast the copy. So I guess we're glad that all the mill spells just rotated out of the format, right? But this is still a pretty solid looking thing right here. I mean, you have to have something in your hand to facilitate it, but that's kind of okay. A lot of the times on turn 2, there's this choice between do I play a removal spell or do I play this permanent? If I play the permanent, I can't kill my opponent's guy, but this allows you to do it anyway, I play my Saga on 2, that lets me play my Infernal Grasp or my Fading Hope for free. And I guess the only downside is that you have to do it right then and there. You can't do it at instant speed, but it's still worth it. I get a permanent on the battlefield, I take away yours. Or I draw some cards, something like that. So I think that's actually kind of neat. And by the way, yes, the way this works with Kicker is that you can pay the spell without paying its mana cost, but then still pay the kicker cost if you want to. I'm pretty sure that's the way it works. You can't, obviously, you don't get kicker cost for free, but I'm pretty sure you can still pay the kicker costs. So, kind of interesting, but just the ability to get a thing on the battlefield and still act in your control deck. You play a tap out control deck. You play this on 2 and you still get to kill your opponent's thing. And then when this goes off, you get to kill another opponent's thing with the same removal spell you cast the first time or whatever. So it's pretty cool. It's not a bad card, but when drawn late in the game, it's fine because you just read ahead to the last chapter and you recast your sweeper. For 6 mana you cast this and then recast the Depopulate out of your yard. I mean, that's actually pretty good. It's a good card. It's a good Magic card, I think. Let's look at Queen Alinal of Ruadak? Where is Ruadak? Ruadak. I'm not too sure. Has that all of the Dominarian places to pull from? I'm not sure I've ever seen Ruadak before, but anyway, I want to know how Saffron Allah pronounces this word. But anyway, it's 3 mana, a green and 2 white for Star legendary elf noble. Queen Alanal of Rudok's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. If one or more creature tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus a 1/1 white soldier creature token are created instead. So like the best thing all day that creates, 1/1 white soldier creature tokens. We keep seeing these. And I really like this one, actually. I think it's a sweet, like, brawl commander for what that's worth, but I think this might actually be somewhat standard playable. On stream the other night, I was just saying I wanted a Keldon Warlord reprint, even though it's a bad card. It's not very good. This, a 3-mana Keldon Warlord in the right color combination this time, the one that makes tokens, is probably a little bit better, but still, you draw it after a Wrath, it is a 1/1 for 3 mana. That's really not good. It's quite ungood, so I'm not too sure, but creating extra tokens is actually kind of good. And there's plenty of things that do create tokens in this format right now. So it's also creature tokens, by the way. So don't get ideas about making treasures or anything like that. Blood tokens, just creature tokens. But there's plenty of stuff that works with that. This is pretty good in what is becoming a very legendary heavy deck. The like Jenny Faye, Jetmir tokens deck. But I'm not sure it finds room for this card, but it probably does because it wants to get the most juice out of its board state as it possibly can, and that thing is making tokens like crazy. So if it makes an extra token every time it makes a token, that's a lot of tokens. Yo, dog, I heard you like tokens. 10-year-old meme. Still, this is a card I can get a little bit more excited about in the uncommon legendary slot, but the one that I'm most excited about is Lugomos, the Hand of Hatred. This is 3 mana, 1 black and a red for a 1/3 legendary human shaman. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste. Sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Tap, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. What? Activate this only if 5 or more creatures died this turn. Now I know what you're thinking. That's too many creatures. You're right. There's probably way too many creatures to have to die for this to work. But this could be potentially very, very good, right? I mean, if you're able to set up a turn where you sacrifice, 4 creatures plus the token that this thing makes, then suddenly you go get the thing that wins the game. The problem is, usually that's like a Blood Artist or something like that, and that thing would already be in play when you sacrifice your guy. You sacrificed all those guys to go get a Blood Artist, you got no more guys to sacrifice for your Blood Artist, so I'm not sure. I don't think it's going to work that way, but if you do have like a big combo-y thing that you need to get to, and ways to sack dudes, maybe, but I highly doubt that this is going to really get to that mode most of the time. So I'm really just going to evaluate this as a 3 mana 1/3 that makes a 2/1 every turn. And in that function, it's not bad. It's not terrible. There's probably better 3-drops you could play. Like I'd probably rather play like Reckless Stormseeker than this. But in a deck that does want to sacrifice a dude every turn, this is more or less almost guaranteed damage against some decks, and it's guaranteed sack triggers against other. I do have a problem that like the sacrifice deck in standard is only Cold Anvil, and it could give a crap about sacrificing dudes. It wants artifacts to eat. So, but if we do see some other pieces for a black-red sack deck or like a really aggressive aristocrats deck, I could definitely something like this finding a home. But right now it is kind of without said home. But at some point during its standard life cycle, I imagine someone will welcome it in with open arms. Now, you may have noticed there's a cycle of uncommons that I'm kind of holding off on here, and that's because I'm super excited about them. Let's look first at Walking Bulwark and, I guess, Coral Colony. Why not? This is one of the ones I'm most excited about, but let's look at Bulwark first. This is just 1 mana for an artifact creature. It's a golem. It's a 0/3 and it has Defender. You can pay 2. Until end of turn, target creature with Defender gains haste, can attack as though it didn't have Defender, and assigns its combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Activate this only as a sorcery. So, woo-hoo. When I feel heavy, man, I'm like super excited about the Defender deck. You've probably already read the other card on screen, but you need like a 1-drop decent Defender guy. And this is not only that, but it's also like your... Arcades Sabbath? What is he called? That's the strategist, right? The commander creature that lets all of your defender guys swing. I'm pretty sure that's Arcades, but one way or the other, you need this guy in like a standard version of this deck. You need 1-drop walls it's literally everything you need. And a lot of turns, you probably only need to pump 4 mana into this to really make it worthwhile. Even if you only pump 2 mana into it, a lot of times you're going to get 4 or 5 damage out of a different swinging creature. So I just love every time a card like this exists. I love every time a Defender deck exists. And to be honest, this time, it looks like it's going to be a force in draft, if nothing else. Let's look at Coral Colony. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for 1/4 wall with Defender. This has 1 and a blue and tap it. Target player mills X cards, where X is the number of creatures you control with Defender. So this is just a better doorkeeper. And I've already said this on Twitter, but in case you don't follow me there, like most of you don't, probably not the best, but my favorite game of Magic I've ever played was back at an F&M 10 years ago at this point, where I was playing, it was when this set came out, so I was playing like blue-white Doorkeeper Defender Mill, and I was up against the shopkeeper of my LGS, and he was playing like a blue-white control deck that was kind of janky. It had like Rune Chanter's Pike and stuff in it. And that game went well over time. It was like an hour and 15 minutes. We ended up attracting a crowd because everybody else was done with their round, but the LGS owner decided, screw it, I don't care about time, we're going to finish this game. And it ended up being one of the most memorable games of my life, and it kind of opened me up to the idea of like, you can win at F&M with budget decks. You can win all around with budget decks. They're a real thing. And I love budgie, combo-y, janky stuff. And in a way, it cemented the identity that I have on YouTube to this day. This one game that I can call back to helped with all of that. So it's just one of my favorite games of all time. So to see a better doorkeeper right now, we're going to play this deck on stream. Probably multiple times while this card is in standard, because I kind of freak out when I see stuff like this. I do. But probably even better than that is Blightpile. Blightpile is actually pretty good, along with, I might as well go ahead and tell you, about Mantle Chaplin. Chaplin is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 0/3 human cleric with Defender. And when it ETBs, you get a 1/1 white bird token with flying for each creature with Defender you control. And not only that, whenever another creature with Defender ETBs under your control, you get another bird. So that's like good. That's especially good in those Arcades decks, I would imagine, if I'm getting that right. But I bet Arcades loves this dude. You just make like 12 1/1 birds. You just go off. So this card might actually be decent there. It really might. But maybe not in standard. But in limited, I imagine this is actually like the big payoff for building the Defender deck. But you could say that Blightpile is too, especially if you get multiple copies of it. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 3/3 Phyrexian with Defender. It has 2 and a black, tap it. Each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of creatures with Defender you control. Probably a more reliable win condition than Coral Colony, right? But here we are. It's a Blightpile. This can win you the game. Again, probably in draft more than anything, but I'm going to be trying this card in standard. I'm telling you. Sub to the channel now, because this will be a dank jank soon. Go follow on Twitch, because probably going to be one of the first few decks we try this season. It's budget, it's combo, it's janky, it's stupid, it's fun, and those are the 5 points of the SBMTG star right there. So expect to see this thing. I'm way too excited about this Defender cycle. But we made it. There is but one more uncommon to talk about on the day. But there's a reason that I saved this one. Let's look at Twinferno, baby. 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant that you will hate until the end of your days. You choose one of these modes, but they're both pretty good. When you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Strictly Better Fork? Cool. What else? Next mode. Target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. So it's a fork. It's a double cast with a Teamer Battle Rage and its instant speed. Dude, what? Like, I'm so glad that Goldspan Dragon is rotating. I guess on some turns I'll copy my Alrund's Epiphany. And then on other turns I'll just give my Goldspan Double Strike and kill you. This is a card that is floored. Pedal to the mat, through the floorboard. This card is pushed like all the way. This card is benching 425. I don't understand why the card exists. I feel like they've been pushing copy stuff in Izzet like way too hard recently, and this is the latest example. I don't think the card is broken. I really don't, but it is, I can say this with confidence, easily one of the best cards of the whole day. A whole day. Rare, mythic, uncommon, no matter. It doesn't matter. One of the best cards of the day. This card is dumb. But let's hit the rares and mythics hard with a vengeance and check out Voldalian Mindsinger first here. This is 3 mana, 1 and 2 blue for a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard. It's got kicker, 1 in a red or 1 in a green. It enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters on it for each time that it was kicked. And when it ETBs, you gain control of target creature with power less than Mindsinger's power for as long as you control Mindsinger. This is yet another one that I think gets a little better the farther back you go in formats. Like it might be better in, Modern and Legacy, where it has more 2 power targets or 1 power targets really that it can nab on turn 1. But there are still okay targets in Standard. That said, I want to say this is good. It obviously is reminiscent of the Volver cycle from way back in the day. And those were halfway decent. Those were. But altogether, you're paying, what? It's 5 mana for, a Mind Flayer that doesn't actually grab whatever you want it to, which kind of is lame. And then 7 mana for a Mind Flayer that's slightly bigger and still doesn't grab everything you want it to do. And Mind Flayer was not a very popular card, but obviously the modal nature of this might make it slightly better. But I also kind of doubt that. I want to like this card a lot. I really do. But I've just been burned so many times in the recent past by cards exactly like this that I look at it with the entire side of my eye. So I want to like it. Can't. So now let's check out a rare legendary creature that maybe should have been in the uncommons. They bumped him up. He got moved up to rare. This is Retadrip of Urborg. This is 4 mana. That can't be how you pronounce his name. That's not even the hardest to pronounce name of the day. The most important thing about the Thrill of Possibility reprint is the Asmarena Martica Dystanackledacker, appearance on the card. So that was the hardest thing to say. Retadrip, easy. This thing's from Erborg. It's 4 mana, 2 and Orzhov for a 3/3 legendary zombie wizard with Vigilance and Ward 2. Other zombies you control have Vigilance. Whenever another legendary creature you control dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's not legendary, and it's a 2/2 black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. So, this, not terrible. It is a hill giant, it's a 4 mana 3/3. Those aren't great stats, especially in a Lightning Strike Standard, but they have to pay the same thing you paid to Lightning Strike this card, right? It's Ward 2, at least makes it a little bit more playable. And the fact that you don't have to pay any extra mana or do nothing, there are no hoops for you to jump through to get your legend right back. And it's not legendary anymore. That's actually kind of repulsive, Like a lot of times when you have a legend out, you have another copy of that legend just kind of sitting there in your hand, festering, looking stupid. Like, why am I playing this deck? But now, when your opponent kills your legend, it just comes right back as a non-legendary 2/2, and you get to play your legend out of your hand again. And then when it dies, you get another 2/2 non-legendary copy of it. So there's a lot of legends in Standard that if only you could play 2 copies of them, they would pop off hard. And this guy lets you do that at a price. 4 mana is a pretty steep starting cost, but if you can give this guy some work to do, he'll do it hard. He'll Hank Hill it. That's the value of the labor this guy provides you. But I also like that he kind of reads legendary creatures you control that have died have Vigilance. he kind of says that, and he himself and all the legends that he brings back for you, makes into tokens or whatever, are also Wandering Emperor approved, which is super important in this format. I just think this guy is super cool. Super cool. And I think that maybe he was one of the uncommon legends at one point, but they're like, hey, trim a power toughness or trim a casting cost of, mana value off of this guy. Give him Ward. Hey, make the creatures non-legendary when they come back. Hey, wipe that, cost off of that. You may pay 1 to make this happen. Just tell you what, make this card good. And we'll bump it up to rare, and maybe it'll be playable. And, it's all speculation. It really is. But any trimming or adding that they did do to this card made it really, really tempting to me. Let's check out Erborg Lurgoy here. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a star 1+ star Lurgoy. We're familiar with this stat line, aren't we? It's got kicker, blue, and a black. As Lurgoy enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards for each time it was kicked. Lurgoy's power is equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard, and its toughness is equal to that number +1. I've already seen people with this take, but it was the take that I had when I first saw the card. Just Stick Fingers. And I didn't play that card. Well, I did. We played Stick Fingers on stream a few times, and it was shockingly kind of okay, but this is probably never going to be very good on turn 2 in Standard, unless you started on one of those, like, family lands that sacrifices itself when it ETBs and go gets a basic. Yeah, I guess you could do that, but even then, what is it, a 1-2 on turn 2? It's probably not great. So I can't be too excited about what is probably going to be like a vanilla 2-3. Still, I can see this being solid, and I'll play it in like every self-mill deck that I play, but there's nothing too special about this particular Goyf. But up next, oh boy, let's look at Weatherlight Completed. Weatherlight Completed. It's... ouch. 2 mana for a 5/5 legendary vehicle with flying. As long as Weatherlight Completed has 4 or more Phyresis counters on it, it's a Phyrexian creature in addition to its other types. Whenever a creature you control dies, that's how it gets a Phyresis counter. Then you draw a card if it has 7 or more Phyresis counters on it. But if it doesn't yet, you scry 1. You know, I say ouch, like, oh, it's so sad that this happened. It's so cool, dude. Like on some level. Even though I have been acquainted with the Weatherlight and its crew since I was 11 years old, this is still the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. It's up there in terms of like Magic stuff that I've seen, you know. But what does the card actually do? I think that functionally it is both bad and good. You know, first of all, it's a 2 mana artifact that doesn't completely suck, which is like hard to find. Sometimes, you know, you've got like Reckoner, Bankbuster, and a couple of others, but this could fit into some decks that are relatively heavy on creatures, obviously. So I kind of like that about it, but it doesn't do a whole lot the turn you play, and it doesn't do a whole lot on subsequent turns. When your creatures die, it gives you a scry. Your creatures die? Don't do it. So that's not bad for a 2 mana initial investment, and once it has enough counters on it, it reads whenever one of your creatures dies, draw a card, which is pretty sick. And on its way to that, it, you know, becomes a 5/5 flyer. This is really good against sweepers. I don't know why I didn't think of that already. But, you know, it's actually de-sweeper protection because, oh, you swept my board. Cool, I got 5/5 flyer now. Do something. So, I don't know, that's pretty good in a Meat Hook Massacre format. So, I don't know, there's, I think, a lot of things to like about this card. Especially the fact that it's metal. But let's keep it moving, y'all. This is Runvelt Horde Master up next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 1/1 Goblo Warrior. Another Goblos you control get +1/+1. Whenever Runvelt Horde Master or another Goblo you control dies, exile the top card of your library. If it's a Goblo creature card, you may cast that card until the end of your next turn. So they learned the lesson from Skimfar Avenger, that if your Skimfar Avenger dies, you really ought to be able to draw a card. And that's kind of what this does. It doesn't straight up draw cards, but it might as well draw cards. I don't know. Avenger straight up actually said draw a card. This only gets you the card if it's a Goblin. And hopefully it is, but I imagine this goes in like all of the Goblo Commander decks until the end of time. It goes in all of the Goblin Historic decks that, you know, some of their cool Anthem effects and stuff are rotating out of Standard. Lucky Historic players that get to play cool Goblins. But, you know, hopefully we'll get some more Standard, like, you know, Goblin Anthem effects and stuff. We can play a real Goblins deck in the Standard because this guy looks really cool and I would like to play with him. But let's check out Stronghold Arena next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an enchantment with kicker green and or white. When Arena enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life for each time it was kicked. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. If you do that, you lose life equal to its mana value. So a Phyrexian Arena Dark Confidant that I gotta pay extra mana for if I want to gain some life. And I don't know, it's solid. It's fine. It's kind of a fine card. I don't like that your creatures have to get through for combat damage. That's kind of butts, because then I have to have creatures out in the first place. I have to have creatures in my deck in the first place. I have to have small creatures I can get through for guaranteed early combat damage. Maybe I have to have tramplers or Menisguys or some flyers or something. So much work for a fake Phyrexian Arena. Like, I do like that it can gain you some life. That's fine. You can play it for 2, 3, 4, whatever, and gain you 6 life. You know, like it could be okay. Again, I like the flexibility, the decision points, the modal nature of these kicker cards and stuff are actually very, very cool. And I wouldn't put it off seeing some play in this case. But again, creatures having to get through for combat damage is actually like a really painful thing for a card's trigger to have to endure. So I'm not convinced it'll see all the standard play, but I'm sure a lot of us will try to make it. But speaking of 3 mana rares that are really very good, let's look at the final rare of the day, and then we'll finish it off with a couple of mythics. But this might well be the best card of the day, except for maybe one of the mythics. But they're both mass removal spells, so keep that in mind. Let's check out Temporary Lockdown here. This is 3 mana, 1, 2 white for an enchantment. When Temporary Lockdown enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until Lockdown leaves the battlefield. Got the whole town on lockdown. This is actually very good. I remember saying specifically during the Morrow teaser video, because this line of text was teased on a card in that video. I said that if this costs 4 mana like a culling ritual, it's not very good. But if it costs 3 mana, it probably is very good. So I guess I have to stand by those words and say this card is actually super sick. You know, it mows down all the tokens, cleans up all the treasure tokens, the blood tokens and stuff too, while also taking out like the things that made the tokens right, in this standard, you know, the Blood Tithe Harvester and stuff. Takes out the Kiki Jiki token, that's kind of important, and just like a million things that I could name here. But, you know, like it's going to take out not only all the 2-drop creatures, but also all the enchantments and all of the tokens that we have so many problems with. And once we hit the Brothers' War, it's going to take out all the 2-drop artifacts we will almost certainly have problems with. We've already seen a few of them. We have Reckoner Bankbuster in the format. It's going to take out that Phyrexian Weatherlight, Weatherlight Completed. You know, it kills that, so that's important. And even though it can be busted and your opponent gets all their stuff back, if you're playing the card right, they won't get back most of the things that you sealed with it, like, again, their tokens and stuff. So, whoa, just a sick little card. And by the way, it will reset all of the counters on, say, Phyrexia or Completed Weatherlight and stuff. It won't have any more Phyresis counters on it, even when they break this. So, just Lockdown, so good. Just really a very good Magic card, and it might not be as good in some cases as like Doomscar, right? 3 mana sweeper. But in other cases, it's going to be even better than Doomscar. And especially considering it can clean up pretty much any card type, I think it's going to be a pretty highly played card coming up. But let's check out Timeless Lotus here. This is 5 mana for a legendary artifact that ETB's tapped, and it taps for Wooburg. I almost called this one. Morrow teased that a new Lotus artifact would exist in this set. And I said, well, it's probably going to be a 5-mana thing that taps for 3. And then I realized that I was just describing Gilded Lotus. 5 mana is an awful lot. I'm not going to lie to you. 5 mana is a ridiculous amount of mana. But if you untap with this, even without tapping a land, or even without dropping a land, you have 10 mana, theoretically. Maybe you spend some treasure on this, but you have 10 mana. And if you don't have that, you probably have at least 8. So you can do just about anything in Standard, from dropping a Kami Ward to a Titan of Industry to whatever, after you play this and untap with it on the battlefield. So if you do tap out for a turn to get this on the table and your opponent doesn't break it, you can pretty much do anything you want the turn after. I guess with Titan of Industry, you do still have to have a couple of green mana laying around, but you probably do. So, 5 mana, basically skip your turn to get this down on curve. All of that not great, let's admit that, but I still think this could see play in some spots, especially in those 5-color decks that are almost certain to exist. We will move on to the final card of the day, and it's the final card of the day for a reason. This card might not be as good as I think it is, but I am very scared of Karn's Cylex. More than I am of Karn, that's for sure. This is 3 mana for a legendary artifact that enters the battlefield tapped. Players can't pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. You can pay X and tap and exile Cylex to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value X or less. Activate this only as a sorcery. Not long ago, I said that Wizards would probably never reprint Nevinyrral's disc into Standard, and they won't. This is a fixed disc, but it still comes into play a turn earlier than a disc, Like disc, I play on turn 4 and bust everything on turn 5. This I play on turn 3 and bust on the same turn I would have played the disc. That actually makes this massive difference a lot of the time. Disc only costs 1 to activate, but it doesn't blow everything up. This does blow everything up. That's also massive. Like, the subtle differences between these two cards are actually very, very important. And even though I think Disc is probably still the stronger card, all things considered, right? Because of how much mana you have to pump into the actual activated ability of this. You get a free, just passive ability on it that Disc doesn't have even anything close to, you know? This will keep the opponent from sacrificing fetch lands in Modern. Like, that's good enough. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a 3-mana thing that literally any single deck in the entire format can play. Mono blue now has 2 sweepers that it can play. You know, this and the Phasing of Zhalfir it has access to. Just kind of scary to think about, but, you know, decks like mono green control. Can it exist? I guess we'll find out. Because now every single color has access to a sweeper when they need it, and a pretty good one, too. Like, there's kind of nothing really wrong with this. I just love that this card exists, or hate that this card exists, and I can't really decide which one. But that is all I have for today. Remember, trivia fact, that Nevinyrral's disc is actually Larry Nevin backwards. He's a sci-fi author whose books I have never once read, but I do know that trivia because every Magic player over the age of 30 knows that trivia, and now you do too. But that's all I got for this one. Just let me know how you felt about all the previews from today. There were a lot of them, but just because there were so many uncommons and stuff doesn't mean there weren't good cards. A lot of the uncommons look stupid, like good stupid, and a lot of the mythics and rares look incredible too. So maybe I'm wrong about that new Volver Mind Flayer thing. Let me know if I am. Maybe I'm wrong that, you know, Weatherlight Completed is actually halfway decent. Maybe I'm wrong that the Karn Cylex is the end of the world as we know it. Let me know if I'm wrong. Just talk me off the ledge. But that's all I got for this one. Just do all the stuff. Check out the Twitch channel where we'll be doing a little bit of the spoilers this season. If you didn't see the spoilers for Sunday, they're on Twitch. Go to twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. Check out that VOD if you want to see me talk about, like, Phoenix Chicken, or Phoenix Chick is what it's called. We had some fun that night. But aside from that, check out all the other stuff. Patreon, you'll see it in the description down there. Like the video, subscribe, blah, blah, YouTube stuff, whatever. You've got what you've come for, and so have I. I'm Dev from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.